Welcome everybody to ImmuPharma's investor presentation. It's great to see you all here. Lots of familiar faces and a few I've never seen before, which is fantastic. So the format of today is that I'm just going to do a very quick introduction, and then I'm going to hand over to Dimitri to talk about the area of lupus specifically and how Lupuzor fits into that. Then we're going to hand over to Robert, who's going to introduce the two other areas of the company, which is Eureka and Elro, and specifically the other programs which cover cancer and diabetes. And then I'm going to step up again and just wrap up. And then we also have the pleasure of Vadim Alexander's company today. I'm sure most of, if not all of you know, who's the senior analyst at Northland. So Vadim is going to give us his wise words. I'm not going to preempt what you're going to say, Vadim, but we're all looking forward to it.
Good things.
What I would ask is if we leave the Q&A till the end, and I think it will just flow a little better, but there will be plenty of time for Q&A. So this is, as I was just saying, the format. We'll go through myself, Dimitri and Robert, and then we'll hand over to Vadim just at the end. So I'm sure, as most of you know, we are a clinical development company, been listed on AIM now about 11 or 12 years. The main area that we're known for is our phase 3 clinical development program, Lupuzor, which is being trialled for the treatment of lupus. Dimitri is going to talk a little bit more about that at the moment, but the headlines are that it's in a phase 3, reporting out in Q1 next year. And in fact, we put an update RNS out this morning, just giving up-to-date numbers of the patients, and which I will come back and summarise towards the end of the presentation as well. But suffice it to say, everything's on track, and we're delighted with the way that that trial is going. There are other areas of the company which we haven't actually talked about a lot, and it's one of the reasons that we wanted to put this presentation on today. And Robert is going to introduce those two areas to you, one in the area of cancer and the other in the area of diabetes primarily. And I think it's about time that we started to raise the profile of those, because for obvious reasons the focus is always on Lupuzor, but we'd like to think that we have an awful lot of value in those other programs as well. Maybe if we can get those out and people can start talking about them, we might get a little bit of recognition in the value as well. The other area which I will just highlight again is our long-standing collaboration with the CNRS. Now, the CNRS is a French research institute, the largest of its kind in Europe, completely funded by the French government, and we have a very long-standing arrangement with them. It's where all the intellectual property and programs have come from, and that's primarily because of Robert's very close collaboration with them over the years, and I think you sit on a number of their committees as well, Robert, yeah. Don't you? But we're very proud of that collaboration, and I think from a commercial perspective and development perspective it's important, because I always put it in this way. They're doing all the very early research and putting all those many dollars, francs, euros, whatever they're putting over the years into that work. And we're fortunate enough that we don't have to invest in that. We're fortunate enough that we can pick it up at a point where we can bring it into development. And that's a very powerful methodology, that we get access to all that early stage research and all the clever things and interesting things that come out of it, but we don't have to invest in it, but we get the benefit of it. And there's not very many companies that can say that. You've met most of the management team before. We're all pretty experienced in what we do in this business, so hopefully you're in safe hands. And suffice it to say also, we are very much of an outsourcing business model. So very, very low overheads. All the equity investment that we raise from shareholders is put directly into the R&D programs. And I will just come on to that now, because as you will be aware, we've been pretty active in the capital markets over the last 18 months or so. Back in February last year, we raised about 8.5 million specifically to fund the phase 3 study for Lupuzor. And then we've done 2 further raisings since then, one in October last year and one earlier this year for 4 million. And it's a pleasure to be able to say that all of those fundraisings have been done at slightly higher prices as we've gone through. But in total, that's £16 million over the last 18 months. Fantastic support from the capital market. So, and for any of you that participated, thank you very much. We're also very proactive, and this is, again, I applaud Lisa for this, and I give her whatever help I can. But we've got a very open and transparent, and I hope very proactive IR program going on. We believe as a company it's really important that we get those messages out to you, that we give you the opportunity to ask us questions in forums such as this. And so that activity is widespread, normal RNS announcements, but we utilise all the different social media these days. We do presentations at various conferences. I do blogs and video interviews, etc., etc. Any other suggestions where we can do anything else? Always welcome to hear. But I'd like to think that you're seeing an open and transparent company, because it's very important to us that that's the impression we give to you. So this is the overview. I'm going to hand over to Dimitri in a moment to talk about this main area, obviously, which is Lupuzor. And then Robert is going to follow up on the nucleus and the peptide platform. So if I can ask Dimitri just to step up. Thank you.
Thank you. So, hi to everyone from me too. I have a few slides to go through. Just before that, something which I know some of you, or most of you hopefully would know, but Lupuzor is the trade name which we came up some time ago. So Forigerimod is more of the chemical name which was given to this drug. And P140, which you also see referred to in the literature, is the very original name, which is kind of a very simple scientific name. And for your information, that comes from a small modification, which is a phosphorylation in the drug. So phosphorylation is the addition of a phosphorus group at position 140. So that's not so relevant. All I want you to know is that there is a rationale why it's called P140. So let me try to go through some of the information which you might have seen in the past. So what is lupus? Well, it's an autoimmune chronic disease. That means it lasts for a long time. It's inflammatory, so it creates inflammation. Sometimes it's fatal. And in fact, most of the people who unfortunately die because of kidney failure. So that's when it really hits you in the end. And it is associated, obviously, with disorders of the immune system. It's an unmet market need, and there are currently not real safe and effective treatments. So people tend to take things like corticosteroids, which help inflammation, but not the underlying cause of the disease. We think, and a number of analysts believe, that the sales potential is obviously of a blockbuster potential. And in terms of how many people are there, how many targets or other target customers, these numbers obviously are in ranges, but what we have seen is that, at least based on the Lupus Foundation of America, in the US, they believe that there are 1.5 million patients. We are saying more conservatively in the US, Europe, and Japan. And some other sources include the kind of total worldwide number, which is approximately 5 million people. That I have already mentioned, and I think you all know that GSK, actually the drug which they have called Benlysta, was developed, or rather discovered and developed initially not by GSK itself, but by a company which they had a deal with, which was Human Genome Sciences, which they acquired when Benlysta was approved for $4.5 billion. And our drug, which we're very proud of, is now in a pivotal phase 3 trial. So our key USPs, and I think that's the major one, is that it's a completely novel mechanism, so it's a first in class, and it modulates but does not block the immune system. That is important because you can block the immune system with immune suppressants, but of course the immune system is a system which we need to protect us against a number of things, infections and also cancer, etc. So blocking it is something which you really can't do. It's almost like having AIDS. So if you try to use an immunosuppressant for helping with lupus, what happens is that if you give enough to block it, then you blocked it, but you shouldn't give enough. So actually the margin between showing some effect and avoiding the side effects is very tricky. So in our phase 2b, which was the last phase, we demonstrated significant efficacy in lupus together with really very good efficacy, safety. And as I hope you all know, we have from the US FDA fast track designation and also a special protocol assessment. In case some of you do not know what goes under the special protocol assessment, this is the, if you want, pre-agreement with the FDA that as long as you run the trial based on what they have agreed with you, then they will give you approval. So the difference with going through a phase 3 study without an SPA, which you can do by the way, is that it allows the FDA to look at it and possibly say, oh, you must also do this and this and this. So the SPA takes some of the uncertainty out, and it's something which you don't get so easily. That is something which hopefully you all understand, which is why you're here, and hopefully needless to say, but the economics are very attractive. To try to explain every part here, I have to go through immunology and biology, so I would need a little bit more time. So that is available publicly. There's also, for those of you who are kind of scientifically interested, we have a video on a website of Professor Müller, Sylviane Müller, at the CNRS in France, which explains the mechanism. It takes about half an hour, so I don't have enough time. The only thing I want to say is that in a very simplistic or rather complicated pictorial fashion, without Lupuzor and with Lupuzor, the APC is an antigen-presenting cell. These are immune system cells which pick up antigens. Antigens are something which is foreign to the body. So they present whatever they think is foreign to the T cell. The T cell is another type of cell of the immune system. And that is done with a specific part of the surface proteins, which are called MAC2 class receptors. So these receptors present the antigen to the T cell, and then the next stage is a B cell, which is another type of cell, which prepares specifically for attacking something which has been the foreign body. So therefore, when we have a viral infection, after a few days we start being cured ourselves, even without any drug, because there aren't really drugs which you can use for simple flu, aside a few special vaccinations every year. But the B cells produce eventually, or rather help to formulate antibody secretory cells, which secrete antibodies which are very, very specific for killing or destroying that antigen. So because lupus is triggered by an antigen which is part of a human protein which is very similar to Lupuzor, the difference with Lupuzor is that it has this phosphorylation, which is why it's called P140. So without having to block this part, which is very difficult, because if you block this part, you will block the whole immune system. If you block it at the presentation level between the presenting cell and the T cell, you actually stop the process. So very simplistically, that's what Lupuzor does. Maybe I should pass on to Robert to go through a little bit more clearly what we have seen in the phase 2 and try to explain the difference between the numbers.
Okay. Sorry. So I wanted to compare published data on Benlysta and published data on Lupuzor. Lupuzor was a 3-month study, phase 2b study, and Benlysta was a 1 year or 18-month study, was published, approved, and this drug is approved. So approved with a difference between placebo and active of 10%. With 3 months treatment, we have a difference of 25%. This implies 2 reasons. One, we believe that our drug will work, and we don't need as much patient from a statistical point of view as Benlysta. So the phase 3 was designed with 200 patients compared to the 550 patients in Benlysta, just because this difference is much higher. You have calculation, FDA agreed on this calculation, so that's the reason why the average of 200 patients in the study, it's enough to prove efficacy. I don't say it's done, but it's enough to prove. So what you can say, 62% responders is huge for such kind of disease. Second point, which is also very interesting, despite the fact this study is 3 months compared to 12, you have no difference between placebo and active in terms of dropout rates. Here you have a difference 8 to 16, which means the fact that the drug has an impact on the dropout rate, because patients feel better, so they will stay in the study. If a patient is impatient and doesn't feel better, he said just, I drop out, bye-bye. And this is, the difference is placebo active, roughly the same, in line with this 10% increase in efficacy. So we have 25 and we have a difference in dropout rates. So we believe, or we expect, or we have ideas that it should work in the phase 3. I cannot predict because the data are not here, but we have reasons to believe that it should work. Okay, no, because I am talking here, I would like to have the next one is try to introduce a little bit on the 2 other activities of ImmuPharma, which are harbored in 2 different companies. One is Elro SRL, other one is Eureka SRL, whereas Lupuzor is on ImmuPharma France. I have to skip for two slides because very recently it was published in December last year that a very reputed cancer research journal published an article of about 20 pages explaining the mechanism of a drug called Nucant developed by ImmuPharma. The 2 findings, the key findings are the following. One, a new way to establish a new therapeutic strategy for cancer is to address the nucleolin. It's a protein, I will explain you later. And by targeting this protein, you have 2 actions. One, you normalize the tumor vascularization, and second, you reduce the size of the tumor. And as a result, you can now treat very difficult cancer like pancreatic cancer by combining 2 drugs. One is Nucant, we ameliorate the vascularization. So you open the door, and after you have a second killer, which is a cytotoxic agent like gemcitabine or doxorubicin, which can enter the tumor and destroy the tumor. So you open the door, and after you have the killer which enters and destroys. And I don't have the data here, but you can show that, for example, you increase the concentration of cytotoxic drug by 3 times in the tumor, and you reduce by 3 times the size of the tumor. So now that this product is ready to go in phase 2, because we have 2 phase 1 completed, where we try to assess the tolerability and the safety of the drug, which is a prerequisite for a cancer drug. And what you expect is to start as soon as possible an efficacy phase 2 in pancreatic cancer, which, as you know, is one of the worst cancer, because we have data that it should work. And of course, having pancreatic cancer, we can go for more or additional cancers like glioblastoma in children, for example, which is we have no cure at all. So it's a promising approach. It's validated, but now we have to go and have more need to go. Okay, so having said that, I would like to go for another company within the ImmuPharma group, which is Eureka. Eureka is, the name came from the Greek Eureka, EU, and because we are handling peptides with urea molecules, we took the name Eureka for urea and Eureka. Okay, just a joke. Okay, it's considered as a kind of peptide platform, and the people involved are Dr. Gilles Guichard from the CNRS. He's a founder of ImmuPharma in the year 2000, 2005, when I created the ancestor of ImmuPharma with Sylvain Muller, Jean-Paul Briand, and some others. We created the company, we signed the deal with the CNRS, and after we took ImmuPharma Limited took over, and we got the funding from UK. Here you have the team, the Eureka team, the scientists, PhDs and PhD students. This is a lab where we are in Bordeaux, it's the region of Bordeaux. It's a top-level unit where we have some labs inside, working together with all the teams inside. And this is a picture of a vineyard you should know, which is Château Haut-Brion, well known. 500 meters far from the unit here. So we can see that excellence attracts excellence. Okay, now. And you have also heard that we are developing a technology called Urelix, which is a manipulation of peptides and creating, therefore, the peptide platform. Okay, peptides and receptors are fundamental to the body's function. You cannot live without peptides, and the interaction between receptors and peptide is very fast. It's very precise because a normal molecule, small molecules, can interact with a lot of receptors. A peptide interacts with only one receptor, and the right one. So it's important to have the right peptide, and if you modify it, you keep the shape, you keep the function. Otherwise, it doesn't make sense. And peptides are a very large turnover, minutes, even sometimes seconds, and you create a system which is a dynamic system, and it's stable. It's a wonder, but it's stable. And so you have certain number of controls, and if you modify something which is not appropriate, you don't have a drug. So, what is the technology? Technology makes peptides more stable, strengths. Urelix allows to maintain the shape and the structure of the peptide, the 3D structure of the peptide. And therefore, it can be used as a treatment. So, and having said that, you need to have the same pathway because you need to have the regulation behind. What are your targets today? We have two ways to manipulate peptides. One is cancer, which means you will design a peptide which is a peptide involved in a cancer. Let's say you have one protein, a second protein, and inside you have a way to link the two proteins in order for the system to work. So what you can do, you can change the peptide in between in order to avoid the connections. Avoiding connection may avoid a cell become cancerous. So one way is to modify this peptide to bring it into the cell. That's difficult. Modify it so it's stable enough and blocks the interaction. Blocking the interaction may avoid the cancer to become a cancer cell. You also can work on diabetes. Remember, diabetes, you have about 400 million sufferers. Maybe some of you are taking injections like Vieta or everyday injection of GLP-1 analogs manufactured by Novo Nordisk, by AstraZeneca, or by Sanofi. Once a day, usually, sometimes once a week. Now, we took all the peptides on the market, the drugs, and we modified them so we have a once a month injection. But you can also use these peptides to do something else. And something else is a disease or a syndrome called NASH, which means non-alcoholic steatohepatitis. This has liver fibrosis, cancer, and death. Global data looked at the impact on the community. Today, we're talking a $25 billion 2016, increasing by double digit in the next few years. So it's a huge market. All big pharma are working on it. And we are in a very interesting situation where NASH is linked to diabetes. So people or big pharmas are using their product once a day to see if it works in NASH. We're doing the same. We are showing end of the year if it works or not. We don't know yet. But if it works, or should it work, remember we have a once a month peptide and not a once a day peptide. So in the future, we can have a drug which should work or could work, but at least on a once a month basis. And if you are a patient, I don't see anyone suffering from NASH here, but it's something which is very important for patients not to get an injection every day, even if it's just subcutaneous. But it makes a lot of difference. So we have a peptide, a technology able to handle cancer, diabetes, NASH, and other similar indications or conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Okay, so this morning we put an update out on the progress of the phase 3 study. So I just wanted to cover that with you, maybe as a precursor to any questions you might have in the Q&A. But just to remind you, we're studying this drug over 28 sites in the US, Europe, and Mauritius. The study is a typical double-blind, randomized, placebo-controlled study. We've got 200 patients in that study who are all recruited now. And we are expecting the top-line data to be announced in the first quarter of next year, and that's all on track. So the update that we put out this morning was just to say where we are in the study, where the patients are. So if we look at the data on the slide, all 200 patients have passed the 3-month stage, and that's actually an important statement, along with the fact that everyone else is progressing through, and we've actually almost got maybe another month. We will have all of them through the 6-month stage. So if you refer back to the data slide that Robert presented earlier, he was making the comparison between our phase 2 data in only 3 months exposure in patients versus Benlysta in 12 months. And that's important in the sense that if you look at any product profile is about efficacy on the one hand and safety on the other. And they're both as important, because you can have a drug which works very effectively, but it has lots of safety issues and lots of side effects that will affect the uptake and the effectiveness overall of that drug in the community. So what we presented so far in our phase 2 data is very effective treatment, certainly compared to Benlysta, and with no side effect profile whatsoever. And the fact that we are continuing to see that safety profile hold up in the phase 3 as these patients progress through, and we've got more patients being exposed for longer periods, gives us a very strong indication that that safety profile is going to hold up all the way through the 12 months, and that's very important for that product profile. On the other hand, we're very expectant that the efficacy will hold up as well. So if we end up with a very effective product with absolutely no side effect profile, then some of the numbers which both Dimitri and Robert have spoken about before in terms of commercial potential of this drug will hold up. So just to remind you of those, pricing for this drug, clearly we don't know at the moment, but in comparison with Benlysta and what we might expect, we usually talk about a price of about $20,000 per patient per year for this drug. you only need 50,000 patients in order to get $1 billion of sales. And the incidence of this is about 5 million worldwide, but if we concentrate on the G7 countries, then you're talking anywhere between 1 and 2 million. I think actually, Vadim, you might refer to this in your presentation just coming up. So in terms of market penetration, if we're trying to get to that magic $1 billion sales target, the blockbuster definition in the industry, 50,000 patients times 20,000, that 50,000 is not an awfully big market penetration into what we think is the available number of patients. I think we've used this slide a lot in our presentations in the last 18 months, and the only reason that we're putting it up again is just to emphasize to you that we've hit all our milestones on time, and we fully expect to hit that last one, which is getting the results out to you in the first quarter next year. So just before I hand over to Vadim, just an overall sum up of the company. I'd like to think that we're slightly unusual for a relatively small company in valuation terms here in the UK on the AIM market. I say that because we have a phase 3 drug which we own 100% ourselves, and I think you all know the reason for that. But the fact that we're literally 6 months or slightly more away from headline results on a drug which is going into an area of high unmet medical need. There is a very good commercial argument for this, and the fact that we still own it, which is very unusual for a small UK company, I think gives us a lot of strength. In terms of investment rationale, I think it stands up for itself. So I'm going to hand over to Vadim. I'm not sure how long you're going to speak for, Vadim, but we'll take Q&A just after that, if we may. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Tim. So Vadim Alexander, I'm the healthcare analyst at Northland Capital Partners. For regulatory purposes, I have to say that we act as a nominated advisor and a broker to the company. Just to pick up on that point that Tim was closing with, actually, it's quite important because very few AIM companies or small cap companies get to this stage. They don't get to a phase 3 asset which they wholly own. So management has done quite well over the years. I've known them since they've listed on AIM for about 11, 12 years now. To have gone the whole cycle to bring this asset to its final stages, and we're at the landing pad now. Only 9 months away from a phase 3 readout, which is phenomenal. Today, I just want to highlight a few of I'm going to touch on some of the points. So there might be some points that are repetitive, but they're important because they actually are what formulate the investment case. The first one is basically that lupus is a major unmet medical need. I mean, with 5 million patients, I wouldn't say gone untreated, but almost effectively untreated in the world today, there is really a market opportunity here. The issue is that the standard of care is retrograde. I mean, nothing's been invented in this area, save for Benlysta, which we'll get to in a sec, for 50 years. Nothing's been invented. So the current standard of care is corticosteroids, immunosuppressant drugs, both of which actually cause some of the long-term consequences that lupus causes, organ damage. So, something has to change in this area. Benlysta is a good example of something that's been invented, however, isn't quite that good. It itself has issues in terms of side effects, and its efficacy isn't that strong. We saw some of the data earlier on comparing the two drugs. So safety not great, and efficacy not that great as well. Yet at the same time, this is the second major point, which I think is important in the investment case. It's actually established a path to market. So it's thanks to Benlysta recently being launched, it was launched in 2012, that we know all the metrics that could be achieved by Lupuzor. So for example, despite its underwhelming efficacy, it currently has $400 million of sales per year. This is Benlysta. So, if we have a drug that's just slightly better even, or as good but with less side effects, which we've seen already in the phase 2b data with Lupuzor, then we could achieve those kinds of those kinds of sales figures pretty quickly. I'm hoping for even more because I think the drug is better. So we mentioned higher response rate, fewer side effects, so safer and more effective. That Lupuzor over Benlysta. Dimitri mentioned a transaction, which I think is important to highlight, and I just wanted to get the number out there a bit more clearly. So the people who invented, co-developed Benlysta was a company called Human Genome Sciences, and the takeout price was $3.6 billion for a 50% of the rights. So GlaxoSmithKline had 50% of the rights, and Human Genome Sciences, which co-developed it with it, had 50% of the rights, and then Glaxo bought the other 50% for $3.6 billion. So we can assume that a drug, roughly speaking, depends on how much debt, but roughly speaking, Benlysta was bought for about $7 billion, or had that, if you back out the worth of the drug. And that's in 2012. So, if we're looking at a drug that could be better, the price would be higher. But we get the general idea of how valuable these drugs are. A novel treatment in lupus could command that kind of price because it already has. And then just in terms of pricing for the drug, Tim mentioned $20,000 per patient per year. That's actually not very expensive by pharmaceutical standards. I mean, Benlysta is commanding $35,000, I think, per patient per year. So we're being conservative there. I'm even more conservative in my model. But really, if we have a drug that's as good with less side effects or better, we should be able to even command a higher price per year. So, $40,000, $50,000 per patient per year isn't unachievable. Now, the third major point is the regulatory position. I think it speaks miles. Dimitri mentioned they have, Lupuzor has been granted an SPA and fast track designation. And I think the key, instead of going through those, because I think he already explained what they are, the key point here is that the FDA doesn't dole these things out lightly. They're very, very strict. So it gives you a feeling for how the regulator is behind this drug. The regulator knows there is a major unmet medical need here, and they've looked at the safety profile of the drug so far, and it seems to be stacking up. So that's another box ticked, and a major one. To conclude, I'm just going to there's a few key points. So basically, I just want to reiterate, we've got a phase 3 asset that targets a major unmet medical need, and its readout is expected in 9 months' time. There aren't that many companies on AIM that are like that. So it's a good opportunity in and of itself. If the trial is successful, we're going to see probably a re-rating in the stock price. But more importantly, it's at that point that I think a partner could strike a licensing deal. I mean, this is the data that and I know that companies are always talking to potential partners, but it's this readout that will allow that kind of deal to be struck. Now, the types of deals that are closed after a phase 3 asset has read out, they're not small deals. In fact, you could almost expect an upfront payment on such a deal to dwarf the market cap of this business at $70 million, or 70 million sterling. That's the type of upfront payment you can expect for a phase 3 asset with phase 3 data. And then finally, just another point is, we're just talking about lupus. P140 is now being shown to affect other autoimmune diseases or other inflammatory diseases with major indications like rheumatoid arthritis, asthma, Crohn's. The list goes on and on and on. So a potential buyer, even though lupus is big enough, won't just buy it for lupus, it'll buy it for all these other indications as well. So I guess to conclude, I think I made my point in terms of, I definitely think this stock is currently undervalued. It's doubled in the last 12 months, and there's more to come.
Thank you, Vadim. Yeah. Okay, so we've got some time for Q&A. Unfortunately, Robert has to leave us now because he's got a flight to catch. So, Robert, thank you very much for your contribution. Just a quick one. Let's prioritise for Robert, if we may. Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation of the phase 2b results. You've added several layers to my understanding. One fear I've always had, although I'm very optimistic about the outturn, obviously, is since lupus is characterised, as I understand it, by some periods of remission, how unlucky might we be that of those 58 in the trial, all went, or a proportion of them went into remission during the trial? What are the stats around that?
It's 12 months. 12 months is a long period of time, plus a screening period, which is another 1 or 2 months. Because the screening period means, okay, we are assessing the patients and we are selecting the patient because they are sick. So we are at a certain level. And we see how it works. Either it's stable or it goes, the parameters are going down. So in fact, having a remission just by chance, okay, let's say 1%. So it's very, very limited.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Robert, thank you once again.
There was on one of the slides you mentioned that ImmuPharma is 100% owned, or is owned the Nucant and both platforms, the Nucant and the other peptide. So what is the deal with CNRS in terms of split? Is that at a company level, at a drug level? Because I assume they have some percentage.
Yeah, it's a drug level. So they will get a proportion of what we get in any deal, or well, it depends on the scenario. If we license, for example, in the typical way, then we would get our royalties and they would get a proportion of that. If we were to sell direct in any circumstances, then again they would get a proportion of that. But it's relatively small amounts.
Just want to turn attention to the finances of the company, and in particular, I'd like your views on the share issuance that you have and your strategy for raising more money in order to develop to fund the development of the 3 exciting drugs. I'm looking at sort of the cash burn, how long that will last before we start getting some positive inflows in, and there are obviously some strategic decisions to be taken on that front.
I think one of the slides that I put up earlier illuminated what we've done in the past 18 months, and what we have done is come back to the capital markets to raise money, firstly specifically to fund the phase 3 study. That was in February last year, 8.5 million, and that money has been used precisely for that purpose. We've raised money since then 2 other times, and that is general working capital purposes and to give us a little bit longer. Back to your point about when does the money run out. The money that we currently have will get us through the end of 2018.
I'd be interested to hear from you about preclinical studies for Lupuzor in other indications. What studies are being done, what results you can yet reveal?
Okay, so we have got certain preclinical studies which we've done indicating that Lupuzor would be effective in other indications such as rheumatoid arthritis. I think Robert did in this forum say that for other indications, the type of study that we would require, which would be a phase 2, phase 3 study, maybe around the same size as the current phase 3 we've got for lupus. What we're talking about is a mechanism of action of Lupuzor, which is modifying the way the immune system reacts. So that's why we believe, and it's backed up by some of this preclinical data, that's why we believe the overall mechanism is applicable more for autoimmune diseases in total rather than just lupus in particular. So it's back to the differentiation we have on the mechanism of action as opposed to anything else. And yes, there is good preclinical data on a number of those other indications. Yeah. Yeah.
On a sum of the parts basis, what value do the analysts assign to the 2 early pipeline programs which Robert talked about, Nucant and Urolix, and in particular Urolix, because it strikes me that is a potentially out-licensing opportunity to other pharmaceutical companies where they can apply it actually to their drugs.
Well, it's probably just fortunate we've got an analyst on the panel, really, isn't it? So I'm going to chuck that question that way.
So the answer is 0, actually, because if you think of just lupus, just that indication, the valuation is so high that it's almost pointless to talk about that. And this is kind of a trap that a lot of these, unfortunately, that a lot of companies get caught up in, is that the most advanced asset dwarfs the other assets. And if they were to be separated, as you say, in a sum of parts, they do have value, but the lead asset is just worth so much more. But you're right, the Urolix platform, very interesting. A company like Novo would be very interested in that. And the Nucant's program, unfortunately, it's a phase 2 ready program and very good data. If it were to be valued standalone, it would be worth a substantial amount of the current market cap of the business. And that's the problem. If you look at just lupus, we're talking, we just mentioned it earlier, an upfront payment on phase 3 readout could be the market cap of the business. And more, exactly.
Okay, one last question here.
I would like to know what is the appetite of the industry for the product if you compare it to their appetite, and Cephalon jumping the gun literally and exercising the option and basically putting your phase 2 trial in jeopardy or diminishing its power. And considering that there are, like AstraZeneca, other approaches, what's the appetite industry for
So the question, just in case you didn't hear it, was what is the appetite of the industry for Lupuzor?
That's a tricky question. We are in contact with a number of companies. I cannot provide any inside information on what stage our discussions are. What I can tell you is that if a deal was signed, it would have been announced, so nothing has been signed. I can also predict an outcome. I can't really give a number of contacts. I can tell you that there are many, but don't ask me how many. I can't say.
Okay, we have run over actually, so thank you very much for your time out today. It's delightful to see you all here with a full room. Thank you for all your questions. There are some refreshments outside. We will all be here milling around, so you're welcome to stay and join us and come and have a chat. But thank you once again.
Thank you.